The training arena aboard the Calvith Ascendant smelled of ozone and cold metal, a scent the assembled cadets of the Trivestran Compact had come to associate with humiliation. Today, that humiliation was scheduled to belong to someone else. Celine stood at the edge of the sparring circle, arms crossed, her dark hair pulled back into a tight braid. She was the only human aboard the exchange vessel, one of 4 species sent to observe interspecies combat doctrine as part of the fragile new alliance between Earth and the Compact. She had expected curiosity. She had expected condescension. She had not expected Instructor Vorik to single out her fellow cadet with a smile that showed too many teeth. "Cadet Darius," Vorik said, his voice carrying across the arena in the clipped, layered cadence of his people. "Step forward." Darius did, unhurried, his boots striking the deck with the kind of quiet confidence that made the watching cadets shift uncomfortably. He was broad-shouldered, scarred along one forearm from a training accident he never talked about, and he had a habit of looking at people like he was already 3 moves ahead of whatever they planned to do to him. "You have expressed," Vorik continued, "considerable pride in your species' physical resilience. Your instructors on Earth call you soldiers. We would like to see what that word means." A murmur went through the crowd. Celine felt her stomach tighten. She knew where this was going before Vorik said another word. She had heard the whispers in the mess hall, the wagers being placed in 3 different alien currencies. "You will face Threx." The name landed like a dropped stone. Conversation stopped. Even the ship's ambient hum seemed to quiet. Threx was not a cadet. Threx was the Compact's bonded war beast, an apex predator from the crushing gravity world of Kalesh, standing 2.5 meters at the shoulder with a hide like layered slate and claws that could shear through duracrete. It was kept below decks in a reinforced containment bay, brought out only for demonstrations of raw force, never for combat. Threx did not spar. Threx ended things. "That's not a sanctioned match," Celine said before she could stop herself, stepping forward. "Threx isn't a combatant, it is a magnificent specimen of natural supremacy," Vorik cut in smoothly. "And Cadet Darius has claimed humans fear nothing. We are simply testing the claim." Darius hadn't claimed that. Celine knew he hadn't. She'd been standing right next to him during the mess hall argument that had apparently spiraled into this. But she also knew, watching the flicker of calculation cross his face, that correcting the record wasn't going to help now. Backing down would be worse. Whatever this was, it had already been decided by people who wanted a spectacle. "Fine," Darius said. "Bring it out." They led Threx into the arena on a containment collar that looked more ceremonial than functional, a detail Celine didn't like at all. The beast's amber eyes swept the crowd, unbothered, almost bored, until they landed on Darius standing alone at the circle's center. Something in its posture changed. Not aggression. Attention. Vorik raised a control baton. "Release." The collar disengaged with a soft click. Threx did not charge. It took one step forward, a slow, deliberate placement of a clawed foot the size of a dinner plate, and then stopped. Its massive head lowered, nostrils flaring as it drew in a long breath through the air, tasting the arena, tasting Darius. The crowd waited for the pounce that never came. Instead, the great predator's ears flattened. Not in submission. In something closer to unease. It exhaled a low rumble that vibrated through the deck plating, backed up half a step, and then simply sat. It sat, like a mountain deciding it had somewhere else to be. Vorik's confident expression cracked. "Threx, engage." He struck the control baton against his palm, sent the activation signal again. The beast's collar chirped in acknowledgement. The command had registered. Threx did not move. It stared at Darius with an intensity that had nothing to do with hunger, ears still pinned, tail curled tight against its haunches. "Threx has never refused a directive," Vorik said, more to himself than anyone. He tried a third time. Nothing. Darius hadn't moved either. He stood loose, hands open at his sides, watching the animal with the same stillness he'd worn walking into the circle. But Celine, who had spent 3 months learning to read him across mess hall arguments and late-night watch rotations, saw the small things nobody else in that arena would catch. The way his weight had shifted almost imperceptibly onto his back foot, the way his breathing had slowed to something deliberate and controlled. He wasn't relaxed. He was ready. And somehow, The animal that had never refused an order in its life was reading that readiness better than the people giving the orders. "It's not scared of losing," Celine said quietly, mostly to herself, though Vorik's aide standing nearby turned to look at her. "It's scared of what happens if it commits." Threx let out one more low rumble. Almost a warning, almost an apology, and then, to the astonishment of every non-human in the arena, it turned, padded back toward its handler, and pressed itself flat against the deck beside the containment collar, refusing to so much as glance at Darius again. A predator that had leveled armored transports on Kalesh had looked a single unarmed human cadet in the eye and decided the fight wasn't worth having. The arena was silent for a long moment before Vorik found his voice again, stripped now of its earlier theater. "That is not typical behavior." "No," said the compact's senior zoologist, a reedy Vantiri woman who had hurried down from the observation deck, her instruments already raised toward Threx in bewilderment. "That is not typical behavior at all. Threx's threat calibration is instinctive, not trained. It does not decide to disengage. It has never." She stopped, recalibrated her scanner, checked it again. Its heart rate spiked before it backed away. That is not the profile of a predator dismissing a smaller creature. That is the profile of a predator recognizing something it cannot safely categorize. Celine walked to Darius's side as the crowd began to murmur and scatter into speculation. "You want to tell me what that was?" Darius exhaled, finally letting his shoulders drop, some of the coiled readiness bleeding out of him now that the moment had passed. "Genuinely don't know. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to flinch. I figured if it came at me, I had about one good window to put a hand on its collar controls before it got its jaws around anything. That's it. That's the whole plan. That's not a plan. That's a coin flip with claws. Wasn't planning on losing the coin flip." Celine shook her head, but there was no missing the disbelief still written across the rest of the arena. Cadets from 4 different worlds staring at the human who had, apparently, out-predatored the actual predator without lifting a finger. The zoologist was still murmuring into her recorder. "In 11 cycles of observation, Threx has never once declined an engagement order. Today it declined an engagement order against an unarmed, uncredentialed cadet with no weapons, no armor, and no visible threat display." She looked up, and for the first time, there was something like genuine unease in her expression as her gaze moved to Darius. "I would very much like to understand what it saw." Vorik said nothing. He was already reviewing the footage on his own datapad, replaying the moment Threx's ears had flattened, rewinding it again and again as though the answer might change on the 4th viewing. It didn't. Celine glanced sideways at Darius, who was watching the great beast being led calmly back toward containment. No fight in it now. No fight in it at all, and she found herself thinking that maybe the wagers in the mess hall that night would need some serious revising. "For what it's worth," she said, "I wasn't scared either. Not of you losing." Darius allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "What were you scared of then?" Celine watched Threx disappear down the corridor, its handlers unusually quiet, its tail still tucked low. "I was scared of what would have happened if it hadn't backed down." Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. Word was already spreading through the ship, from the arena, to the mess hall, to every corner of the Calvith Ascendant, that the compact's apex predator had looked one human cadet in the eye and decided, all on its own, that some fights simply weren't worth having.